They are over there fighting the fire. Quieter, don't comment. Can we leave here faster? An oil depot.
Now, it wasn't just the oil refineries that Ukraine targeted last night. It was a very active night for the Ukrainian Defense Forces because they also decided to go after a drone production facility. Russian media reports a large fire in Obukovo-Kaluga region of Russia. A drone production facility was hidden on a Russian plant. After a drone attack, these Russian drones will never hurt Ukrainians again. And here's the clip of the attack.
Никуда нет, мама.
Honestly, there were so many attacks last night. I feel like you guys might be getting bored of me listing all of them out. But the next one we have in Voronezh region of Russia. In Voronezh, long-range drones attacked a gas infrastructure facility. Also in Rostov-on-Don, these drones attacked the territory of the Kalinin gas pumping station. Here's the clip. Now, as you guys know, we often have to blur some of the clips from the war, and on top of that, there are many clips that we just cannot show on YouTube because YouTube considers these clips not advertiser friendly. So it often restricts and demonetizes our videos. That's why we recently opened up Patreon, where we post war clips every single day. All the clips of Ukraine hurting the Russian oil industry, the energy industry, that Russia so badly depends on. Well, it's not just Ukraine that's having all the fun. President Trump is joining in too. President Trump's administration further restricts Russian access to US payment systems. In January, President Biden put a 60-day exemption in place that allowed certain energy transactions from sanctioned Russian banks to continue. This waiver has lapsed now, so the Russian banks can no longer access US payment systems to conduct major energy transactions. This will make it much harder for other countries to buy Russian oil. And it's already having effect. It's already taking effect. 2 Chinese state-owned companies have halted purchase of Russian oil, and 2 more have decreased the amount of oil purchased. They are assessing compliance with US sanctions on Russia. Now, the reason this is happening is because even though sanctions were not placed on China, if there's any Chinese businesses that were caught doing businesses with the sanctioned companies in Russia, then they will face secondary sanctions. That means they will lose access to US payment system, they will lose access to using US banks, US dollars, and much more. If you're a big company, especially a multinational company, you cannot afford to lose access to the US dollar because that would mean just insanely more amount of headaches for you to do business. And that's exactly why Chinese companies are respecting the sanctions, because they don't want to risk losing access to US banks and US dollar. Here's an interesting quote I found from Google co-founder Sergey. I think he was a CEO at one point too, but he was born in the Soviet Union. Luckily, his family was able to get an exit visa and come here to the United States. But he called Russia Nigeria with snow. And numbers kind of back it up. So if we look at it, population is similar. I guess that doesn't matter much. Gini index is basically a number that conveys what's the inequality in a country, like what's the difference between the richest and the poorest in the country. Russia and Nigeria are very close to each other. On corruption level, Russia is again very close to Nigeria, but an interesting fact here that many pro-Russian commentators don't mention is they always bring up how Ukraine is a very corrupt country, but in reality, Russia is even more corrupt than Ukraine. Now, in Russia, around 33% of the population doesn't have indoor plumbing. They have to go out to do their business every morning, basically. So much for a superpower. So in fact, in this ranking, Russia just ranks 2 places above Nigeria. Male life expectancy is 58 in Russia. which might have gone down even more since the invasion or the special military operation began. Now, you can read the rest of it, but I do want to mention the Press Freedom Index. Even though Russia loves to brag about how it's a very free, democratic-loving country, in reality, if you question Putin, you fall out of a window. There's just something in the air where it makes you unalive yourself if you question the dictator that is Vladimir Putin.
Lastly, as you guys...
President Lukashenko of Belarus is a murderer. These are the words of Ukraine's president, Vladimir Zelensky, as he revealed shocking information during a podcast with American podcaster Lex Friedman. It started with Zelensky revealing that in the days following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko called him on the phone and apologized for aiding Russia and for his country's involvement in the war. This confession is big news because Belarus has stood as Russia's key ally since the war began. And this shocking turn of events means they have stabbed Putin in the back and switched sides.
Days after the first days of the war, I spoke with Lukashenko on the phone, and he apologized, and he said that it was not me. Missiles were launched from my territory, and Putin was the one launching them. These are his words. I have witnesses, and I apologize, he said. But believe me, that's what he told me. Volodya, this is not me. I'm not in charge, he told me. I'm not in charge. These are just missiles. This is Putin. I told him, don't do that. This was done without me.
Zelensky then proceeded to go in hard on Lukashenko, calling him a murderer for even allowing Russia to launch missiles at Ukraine from Belarusian territory. A bit of a twist came when the Ukraine president said that Lukashenko was feeling so guilty and looking to reconnect that he suggested that Ukraine should retaliate by bombing the Mozyr oil refinery. This oil refinery, located in the Gomel region, is one of Belarus's largest. It processes primarily Russian crude oil. It holds significant importance, and if indeed President Lukashenko offered it up, it shows just how desperate he is. I use the word if because there's been some buzz about whether Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko actually apologized to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, or if this is all fabricated. Lukashenko's press secretary, Natalia Eismont, recently stepped in to set the record straight. Eismont clarified that while there was indeed a phone call between Lukashenko and Zelensky, it wasn't an apology. According to her, the call happened because of an emotional reaction from Lukashenko's youngest son, Nikolai, who had Zelensky's contact info on his phone. She stressed that Lukashenko didn't apologize to Zelensky because, in her words, there was nothing to apologize for. Lukashenko himself would later proceed to directly respond to the allegations. He said that, by making such false claims, Zelensky was following orders given to him by the West so as to drag Belarus into the war by making the statement. At a church service during Orthodox Christmas, he said, "Why is Volodya Zelensky acting like this? We were fine with him. On good terms. And my little family too. What is he yapping about? What is he missing? He is being given orders. They must do everything they can to drag the country into war." So basically, Lukashenko is not just denying all this, he is saying that this is a conspiracy to drag Belarus into war to take over its territory. Interesting. To understand the context of all these missiles, secret plans, war talk, and Belarus's involvement, we have to step back and break down the situation from where it started. This story begins with a bang, literally, with missiles being launched from Belarusian soil into Ukraine at the start of the invasion. The scenes were dramatic and terrifying, as Ukrainian cities were struck by these missiles, causing widespread damage and chaos back in February 2022. The missile strikes, which were part of a larger coordinated Russian attack, served as a wake-up call for the world, signaling that Belarus was more than just a bystander in this conflict and that the war had started. Belarus, under President Alexander Lukashenko, allowed its territory to be used by Russia for these attacks. Can you imagine the shock and fear in Ukraine when missiles started coming in from Russia and Belarus, two of its neighbors? The missiles weren't randomly fired either. They hit critical infrastructure, military targets, and even civilian areas, killing a lot of innocent people. The impact was devastating, leaving Ukrainians to pick up the pieces and respond to this act of war. Naturally, Ukraine's leaders were quick to condemn Belarus, making it clear that using Belarusian territory for such attacks was an act of war. The international community didn't sit on their hands either, as countries around the world denounced Belarus's action. But Belarusian officials gave mixed messages, adding to the confusion. Some claimed that they had no choice but to assist Russia, while others denied any involvement altogether. In a few minutes, we'll dive into how they claimed Belarus had no choice in the matter. The mix between denying responsibility and accepting was meant to water down any definitive narrative. But what followed next made it all useless, as Belarus kept digging a deeper and deeper hole. As the war hit its stride, the world soon noticed that despite the air of confusion that President Lukashenko and his people wanted to pretend to create, the missile strikes were just the tip of the iceberg. Belarus's involvement in the war extended far beyond that. It was revealed that even before the invasion, Belarus hosted massive military drills with Russian troops. These drills, known as Allied Resolve, were meant to be temporary. However, the Russian troops didn't leave when the exercises ended. Instead, like those relatives you don't like, they stayed. And Belarusian territory became a launch pad for the invasion. You might be thinking, well, why did they stay in Belarus? The answer to that is simple. Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, is approximately around 56 miles or 90 kilometers from the border with Belarus. This strategic positioning was crucial for Russia as it provided a direct route to Kyiv, making it easier for Russian forces to advance and harder for Ukraine to defend itself. That's why when the war was in full force, the northern border of Ukraine, shared with Belarus, became a hotspot of military activity, with Russian troops using it as a gateway to the Ukrainian capital. So much for Belarus being neutral, right? Please take a moment to hit the like button and share this video with others so that we can keep the real, unbiased narratives alive in a world where the truth is censored and suppressed. Let's move on. As if aiding Russia wasn't enough, there were also reports, although denied by Lukashenko, that Belarusian troops were directly involved in the fighting. This allegation elevates the Belarusian involvement to a whole new level, and it adds gravity to why Zelensky really called Lukashenko a murderer. And given that now, Putin keeps denying the involvement of North Korean troops, even though the evidence is insane, lets us know that the words of these maniacs can't be trusted. Whether or not this was true, Belarusian support for Russia was so vast that it wouldn't be wild to just call the war a 2 versus 1 affair. Think about it. Belarus offered housing, logistical support, intelligence, and medical aid to Russian forces. Hospitals in Belarus treated wounded Russian soldiers, and Belarusian infrastructure was used to transport supplies and reinforcements. This support was critical for Russia's military operations, especially in the early stages of the invasion. And just to highlight how they were biased, Ukrainian refugees who fled the war to Belarus were detained by Belarusian authorities and forcibly returned to Ukraine, where they faced grave danger. Essentially, the Belarus troops were condemning innocent civilians to death while they packed their hospitals full of Russian troops. Imagine that. This inhumane treatment drew international condemnation and added to the list of crimes committed by Belarus. Since then, inside Belarus, reactions have been mixed. Lukashenko and his allies have remained firmly in support of Russia, but many ordinary Belarusians are appalled by their country's role in the war. It got so bad that protests even erupted in cities across Belarus, with citizens demanding an end to their nation's involvement. As you can imagine from a man called Europe's last dictator, Lukashenko responded with harsh crackdowns, opting to use the whip to put people in their place, the same way he had done back in 2020. Don't worry, we'll cover that part in just a few minutes. After doing all this, there have been crazy consequences, as Belarus has found itself increasingly isolated on the international stage with no friends to aid it except Russia, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, all of which share borders with Belarus, were particularly vocal in their criticism and disgust of Lukashenko. They increased their military readiness and bolstered defenses, fearing that the conflict could spill over into their territories. The European Union and the United States also reacted by imposing severe sanctions targeting Belarusian officials, businesses, and the economy. These measures aim to pressure Belarus into withdrawing its support for Russia and ending its involvement in the conflict, and they have been working from day one. Belarus's economy shrank by about 8.7% in 2022, a steep drop that caused a lot of pain. Just so you understand why, the previous year their economy had only grown by 2.3%. So that's years of growth undone. Just like that. Trade with Western countries also took a serious hit, with exports to the EU dropping by around 30% in 2022. That's a huge blow to an economy that relies heavily on exporting goods. Financially, it's been tough too. Belarus has lost access to about 50% of international financial markets, making it hard to get loans and investments. Inflation has shot up to 12% in 2022, squeezing the wallets of everyday Belarusians. At the same time, the energy sector, one of the main pillars of the economy, hasn't been spared either. Revenues plunged by 20% due to disrupted trade links and reduced market access. All these factors have combined to create a challenging economic environment for Belarus. All these problems have begun to create growing discontent with Lukashenko's leadership within his own borders. Despite this domestic and international backlash, Lukashenko has tried to play a double game. From the very beginning, he publicly supports Russia's actions and provides crucial logistical support. But he also attempts to present Belarus as a neutral party by hosting peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. These negotiations held in Belarusian cities were aimed at brokering a ceasefire and finding a diplomatic solution. However, to no one's surprise, these talks didn't produce any lasting agreements, and the fighting has continued. So why is Lukashenko so insanely loyal to Russia and Putin? Well, there are a few reasons, and they all tie together to form a complex picture. First off, Belarus's economy leans heavily on Russia. We're talking subsidies, loans, and energy supplies. Imagine being so financially tied to one country that breaking away could cause economic chaos back home. That's pretty much the situation for Belarus. Russia has been a major lifeline for Belarus, keeping its economy afloat during tough times. Next up is political survival. For Lukashenko, staying close to Russia means keeping his grip on power. Imagine being so addicted to power that you sell your soul still, despite being in charge since 1994. Crazy. Russia's support gives him the resources to suppress opposition and maintain control over citizens who clearly don't want him anymore. It's a lifeline that he can't afford to lose. Without Russia's backing, Lukashenko would find it much harder to fend off political rivals and dissent. Russia's support was particularly evident during the 2020 presidential election and the subsequent protests. After the disputed election results, which many believed were rigged, mass protests erupted across Belarus. Lukashenko faced his biggest challenge yet, with thousands of people demanding his resignation. During that hectic time, Russia stepped in with significant support once again. Putin pledged a $1.5 billion loan to Belarus, providing much-needed financial assistance. Additionally, Russia offered political backing, with Putin publicly congratulating Lukashenko on his re-election. Though this might seem harmless, it was a message on its own. This support helped Lukashenko suppress the protests and maintain his grip on power. By suppressing, we mean this.
Я тебя не трону! Отошла! Я заберу его с болью или без боли.
Пожалуйста, не надо! Пожалуйста!
Давай!
Тише, не надо!
Что?
Не надо, пожалуйста!
Что?
Не надо, пожалуйста!
Что?
Мы идем домой, все, мы идем домой, пожалуйста. Мы идем домой, пожалуйста.
Руки от меня!
Пожалуйста,
Убрала руки!
пожалуйста, мы идем домой. Все, мы все
Ну что,
идем.
газовый баллончик достать или что?
Пожалуйста.
Вставай!
Это ребенок.
Вставай!
Не надо.
Он с маски нахуй! Блядь, ладно,
Пожалуйста,
спасибо.
не надо.
Then there's the historical connection to consider, as Belarus and Russia share a deep political and cultural history. This long-standing relationship has been something Lukashenko has nurtured, ensuring stability for his regime. The ties between the two countries go back centuries, and this shared history has created a sense of loyalty and mutual support. Also, from a strategic perspective, Russia's military presence in Belarus adds a layer of security for Lukashenko. It acts as a buffer against potential threats from neighboring countries and internal unrest, as war with him is war with Russia. Knowing he has this backup gives him a sense of protection that allows him to do as he pleases. In a way, it's like having a big brother looking out for you. If your big brother is a bullying dictator, Lastly, the personal bond between Lukashenko and Putin cannot be ignored. Their strong relationship has been mutually beneficial, and this personal rapport is a key element in their alliance. Putin and Lukashenko have developed a close working relationship over the years, which has helped to cement the ties between their countries. All these factors make it nearly impossible for Lukashenko to distance himself from Russia, despite the heavy toll of international sanctions and external pressure. His loyalty to Russia is not just a matter of choice, but also of necessity, driven by economic, political, historical, strategic, and personal considerations. This relationship is not just one-sided either. Russia also benefits a lot from its relationship with Belarus. Let's dive into that for a second. First and foremost, there's the strategic military advantage that Russia benefits from. Belarus gives Russia a crucial foothold on NATO's eastern border, which is a big deal. By having access to Belarusian territory, Russia can project its military power more effectively in the region. During the conflict with Ukraine, this has been particularly beneficial, as we have been discussing. Belarus has served as a staging ground for Russian military operations, allowing Russia to launch attacks and move troops more efficiently, and to better coordinate and execute its military operations. This kind of logistical support is invaluable in this war, where Ukraine seems to have the upper hand now. From a military perspective, having a strong presence in Belarus provides Russia with additional security. Belarus's military infrastructure and territory have been used by Russian forces during the war, and in fact, Russia currently maintains 2 military bases in Belarus and is preparing to station tactical nuclear weapons in the country. This significantly boosts Russia's military capabilities and diversifies its power. Politically, the alliance with Belarus helps Russia maintain its influence in Eastern Europe. By supporting Lukashenko, Russia ensures that Belarus remains a friendly government. This political leverage is crucial for Russia's geopolitical strategy. A friendly Belarus acts as a buffer against Western influence and helps Russia extend its reach in the region. This was evident during the 2020 Belarusian presidential election that we just spoke about, when Russia's support helped Lukashenko weather the storm of mass protests and maintain his grip on power. More than likely, in the coming elections on January 26th, Putin will find a way to be involved somehow. It is crucial for Putin's strategy that Belarus always have a Russian-leaning government, the same way he wanted it in Ukraine. Moving to the heart of the nation, economically, Belarus is like a trusty sidekick. The two countries have closely intertwined economies, with Belarus relying heavily on Russian help. In return, Russia benefits from the stability of having a loyal economic partner. For example, Belarus's purchase of Russian oil and gas at favorable prices not only supports the Belarusian economy, but also ensures a steady market for Russian energy exports. This mutual economic support helps both countries maintain financial stability. The trade relationship is so strong that in 2021, the trade turnover between Russia and Belarus amounted to $40.1 billion, with Belarusian exports to Russia totaling $16.4 billion and imports from Russia reaching $23.7 billion. It's gotten even worse now. Trade between Russia and Belarus has seen a noticeable increase since the war began. Before the conflict, Russia accounted for about 49% of Belarus's trade. By mid-2022, this figure had risen to 58%, and it exceeded 60% by the fall of that year. This uptick is mainly due to the sharp reduction in Belarus's trade with Western countries and the complete closure of the Ukrainian market to Belarus. So as you've seen, the relationship between Russia and Belarus is highly advantageous for Russia, and it's something that they would like to preserve as much as they can. With all this said, you can understand why during the podcast, President Zelensky sounded angry and grieved, because Belarus is and has not been a neutral party like it claims, but it is a frontman, a Russian frontman. The fact that it has been a participant in this war is repulsive. The war between Ukraine and Russia has caused immense suffering and significant losses on both sides. In fact, the Russia-Ukraine war is the deadliest war in Europe since World War II. First off, the human cost has been devastating. Just last month, President Zelensky released the official casualty figures for the first time, revealing that since the start of the war nearly 3 years ago, Ukraine has lost 43,000 soldiers, and that 370,000 more were wounded, as if that's not enough. This war has also taken a heavy toll on civilians, with thousands of lives lost and millions of people displaced. As the conflict drags on, the situation for civilians has become increasingly dire. People are facing shortages of food, water, and medical supplies. The infrastructure that supports daily life, like water treatment plants and power grids, has been severely damaged, making it hard for people to access basic necessities. Hospitals are overwhelmed with the injured, and healthcare workers are stretched thin. Many children have been left orphaned, and the psychological trauma of the conflict is leaving deep scars on